All right. Hello and welcome to everyone who is joining us. As you come in, we are just going to give everyone a couple minutes to filter in. So if you want to throw in the chat where you're joining us from, where you're tuning in from, we would love to see it.
Oh, wow, Colorado.
Yeah, we've got a hi from Colorado, Katy, Texas,
Wow.
Virginia, New Jersey. Great. All over so far.
Colorado, Wisconsin. Wow.
I myself am well, not technically in Washington, D.C. I am in the suburbs at the moment because I am doing this from my home, but just outside of Washington, D.C. We've got another D.C., our dear friend Caitlin.
Hey, Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn too.
All right, we'll probably just give it one more minute. Anyone who has just joined us, feel free to let us know where you're joining from in the chat, and also feel free to share your enthusiasm for this amazing panel. I am very excited. We've got representation from several different time zones, mostly in the US in the audience, but some of our authors are joining us from the other side of the world. And a special thank you to anyone, any of our authors or any of our audience who are joining us from a time zone where it is very late at night. We are very happy to have you here and celebrating witchy books with us, even though it is late where you are.
It's the witching hour. Perfect.
It is.
Sangu, is it midnight for you, or is
Yeah,
past
it's like
midnight? Yeah, that's what I thought. I was
yeah.
like, oh, it must be, yeah. 12:30. I like your mood lighting though. That'll help.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
You know, it's my favorite color.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Had to be. Couldn't be anything else.
Nope,
Actually, I did think about green. Briefly thought green, and then thought, no, that makes me look like I'm genuinely like sick. No, thank you. Purple it is.
Yeah. My skin has like natural greenish undertones, so I can't do that. And people are like, that's not possible. And then they see me without makeup and they're like, oh, yeah. You were not lying about that.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. If anyone continues to join, then that is great. But we've got a good number of people in the audience right now. So hello and welcome. I'm Emma from East City Bookshop. I'm the assistant store manager, and tonight I will be moderating this wonderful panel of authors who have written various witchy themed books. We're so happy to have all these authors here, in particular to celebrate the launch or the day before the launch of Ava Morgyn's The Witches of Bone Hill, which comes out tomorrow. And we have a special treat for you all if you pre-order, or at this point order, a copy of The Witches of Bone Hill through East City Bookshop, either through our website directly, or if you ordered it on Eventbrite, then we have not only a book plate, a signed book plate for you, but also some other little goodies like a postcard and a bookmark. So we're very excited to share those with you. And I think we'll also be getting some book plates for a couple other authors on this panel. So that's very exciting as well. And even if we don't have goodies, make sure to support our authors and also us. We can bring these events to you in part thanks to book sales. So please consider supporting us by purchasing one of these authors' lovely books. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started by doing some intros. I will intro each of our authors, but I'm going to let each of the authors tell you a little bit more about their book since we have 6 of them with us tonight. So to start us off, the woman of the hour, Ava Morgyn, grew up falling in love with all the wrong characters in all the wrong stories, then studied English and writing and rhetoric at St. Edward's University. She is a lover of witchcraft, tarot, and powerful women with bad reputations, and she currently resides in Houston with her family, surrounded by antiques and dog hair. Lana Harper is the New York Times bestselling author of the Witches of Thistle Grove series, one of my favorite series. Writing as Lana Popovic, she has also written 4 YA novels about modern-day witches and historical murderesses. Born in Serbia, Lana grew up in Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria before moving to the US, where she studied psychology and literature at Yale University, law at Boston University, and publishing at Emerson College. She lives in Chicago, where she spends most of her time plotting witchy stories and equally witchy tattoos. Sangu Mandanna is the author of the critically acclaimed romantic fantasy, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, another of my favorites, the upcoming children's fantasy, Vanya and the Wild Hunt, and a number of other novels. She lives in Norwich, I think is how you say it.
Yeah.
A city in the east of England. KJ Dell'Antonia is the former editor of the New York Times Motherlode and the co-host of the #AmWriting podcast, as well as the author of How to Be a Happier Parent, In Her Boots, and the instant New York Times bestseller and Reese's Book Club pick, The Chicken Sisters. She lives with her family on a small farm in Lyme, New Hampshire, but retains an abiding love for her childhood in Texas and Kansas. And I am very excited about her book, Playing the Witch Card, which comes out soon. Melinda Taub is an Emmy and Writers Guild Award-winning writer, the former head writer and executive producer of Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. She is also the author of Still Star-Crossed, a young adult novel which was adapted for television by Shondaland. She also wrote that thing about the Baroness in The Sound of Music that your aunt likes. She lives in Brooklyn, and The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch, which I am also very, very excited about, is her debut adult novel. And Constance Sayers is the author of 2 best-selling novels, A Witch in Time and The Ladies of the Secret Circus, which is the one I have here. The latter receiving both a Publishers Weekly and Library Journal starred review. Her work has been translated into 6 languages, and her 3rd novel, again, which I am very excited about, The Star and the Strange Moon, will be published by Hachette on November 14th of this year. She is a member of the Historical Novel Society, and her short fiction has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Nest. So, as you can see, I am very excited about all of these books. I have either read them already and love them, or I'm very excited to be able to read them soon. And my first question for all of you is, can you just give us a quick elevator pitch of your book, of your witchy book, and what happens in it? And Ava, would you like to go first?
So really it's about 2 sisters who inherit, a creepy old estate from a relative that they've never met and are estranged from, only to get there and find out that there's a lot more to their family legacy than they imagined, and they're going to have to piece it together in order to survive.
All right, if we want to just go in the order that I have you on my screen, Sangu, you're up next.
Yeah, so The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches is a cozy romantic fantasy about a lonely witch who has never had a family of any kind, and when she unexpectedly becomes the tutor to 3 young unruly witches, she discovers the family she never had, and it's sort of practical magic meets, I suppose, The House in the Cerulean Sea. Yeah.
Great. Constance?
Yeah. Ladies of the Secret Circus is about a woman who is stood up at the altar, and her fiance goes missing, and no one in her family is really all that surprised about it. Apparently that happens a lot in their family. So She goes on a quest to find out what happened to him, and it really, very similar to what Ava has written. It's she finds her legacy on a quest, and it very well may lead to a 1920s circus that could be in hell.
And do you want to tell us at all about your upcoming book?
Yeah, sure. The Star and the Strange Moon is coming out November 14th, and it is about a down on her luck actress in the 1960s in London, and she gets one offer and one offer only to do a horror film, and in France, a French new wave horror film. So she goes and she, goes on set, and it's a disaster. And in the middle of the shooting, she gets actually sucked into the horror film, and then she's basically living in the horror film, and she knows the ending, and so she's basically trying to stay ahead of what's happening. And then modern day, there's a filmmaker who is trying to find out what actually happened to her. And so they very well may meet. So.
All right. I've got KJ up next.
Sure. So playing the witch card, which actually came out last week. Think Gilmore Girls meets Practical Magic, only grown-up Gilmore Girls, or Ellen Hildebrand, but make it witches, with a rogue deck of magic tarot cards in a very small Kansas town full of secrets that the rogue deck of tarot cards is determined to unveil all of the various family secrets. And my protagonist, Flair, had hoped to escape her ex and her magic and her mother by fleeing to this small Kansas town. But it turns out that all three of those have very different ideas.
That sounds fun. All right. I've got Melinda up next.
Yeah. So The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch is a sort of a retelling of the events of Pride and Prejudice through the eyes of Lydia, the youngest, wildest Bennet sister, in which she sort of reveals that she is actually wilder than anybody knew, and she is, in fact, a witch. And it sort of retells her story while giving sort of like a different motivation for a lot of the things that she does.
All right, and Lana, you're up last but not least.
No worries. I actually forgot I was gonna have to do this because I was like, these books sound great. I'd like to add them all to the TBR immediately. And Charmzoy is the fourth installment in The Witches of Thistle Grove, and it's out of the four magical families in this small enchanted Illinois town. The Harlows are the bookish record keepers, sort of, as far as we know, the owners of the least amount of magic. This is the second Harlow book, The Paybacks of Which was also narrated by a Harlow narrator. And in this one, Delilah Harlow, who is the owner of the indie occult bookstore, has been hit by an oblivion spell in the previous book. So she's trying to piece together her memory. So she spell to sort of try to get her mind together, and it turns out that she does feel better, but she's also become a beacon for supernatural creatures, so she has to team up with morally ambiguous half-fae monster hunter from Chicago to figure out what's happening, how to fend off all these rogue succubi, and just generally stop supernatural creatures from wreaking havoc in Thistle Grove.
Have you read any of the other Thistle Grove books? I think this is maybe the steamiest one yet.
I think so. I just keep pushing the limits because I moved from YA into adult, and then I kept being like, can I say this? Can I do this? Oh, I definitely can. I think so too. There aren't as many steamy steams, but I think the ones that are in there are pretty for real. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So if you're in the audience and you had not already heard of any of these books, go ahead and add them to your TBR now, because you are definitely going to want to read them. My next question for all of you is about your magic systems. So all of these books are a little different, but they all incorporate magic in some way. And so my question is, can you tell us a bit about the magic system and also how you use that magic system to set the tone of the book? And anybody who feels like they have a good answer can jump in.
Well, I'm happy to go first simply because mine is based somewhat on historical fact, which because my characters are descended from a line of Nordic witches, or they were really seeresses. The vulvas, I really try to keep their magic to what vulvas actually were known for doing in their culture and time. Just kind of juiced it up for fiction, but essentially tried to stick to the same powers these women were known for having. So controlling and influencing weather, shape-shifting, healing, cursing, these what was really practical magic at the time for people in that culture, but sort of taking it out of its context and imagining it today and imagining how it might have been used through history. And then, like I said, juicing it up to make it even more fun and exciting for the story.
So cool.
Well, so I had fun because I've sort of got two magical things going on. And the first is a kind of hereditary magic that some of the families in this small town have, and that is your, spell-based magic that we would all like to have, where you can light candles and do things like that. And then there's also this deck of tarot cards. And what I did with the tarot cards was to stick with what I believe when it comes to tarot cards, which is that they are a mechanism for looking at your story and looking at where you are in your personal history in different ways when you look at the different cards. But there's this particular deck. So I'm not saying it's not like an all tarot is telling people's fortune, it's predicting the future kind of book, but there's this particular deck that is imbued with a very different kind of magic. So I really enjoyed being able to both use the tarot in the way that I feel that the tarot is best used, but also have a magic version that is a whole lot more. Melinda, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. My dog was yelling, so I muted and then I forgot. So in Lydia Bennet Witch, the magic system, I tried to make it reflect the world of Pride and Prejudice, and Jane Austen's books are so much is about money and the cost of everything, and people kind of have to sell themselves in order to survive, to stay in their strata of society. They have to be pretty mercenary at times about how much money they have and how much money potential partners have. So the system of magic is extremely transactional. Every spell has a price, and the price is the spellcaster can pay it, or you can ask someone else to pay it, or you can make someone else pay it. So it's meant to sort of reflect both the prettiness that we think of when we think of, Regency books and Jane Austen books, but also some of the brutality.
I love that. It's so creative.
Thank you.
I can go. Is Constance going? No, that's okay. I will take a pass. I can't. I'm incapable of speaking when someone else is not speaking here. Mute.
I'll go. Probably my witchiest book was the debut novel, Witch in Time, obviously, given the title. And I think that the magic system in that is a mother back in Belle Epoque, France, Paris. Her daughter gets involved in a very inappropriate relationship with a young daughter with a painter who comes to summer and paint people, while he is, vacationing in the countryside of France. And the relationship goes awry, and the mother vengefully curses the painter, but accidentally draws her daughter into the curse. And so essentially what she does is she causes her daughter and this painter to relive their love affair again and again and again every 34 years. and there's another person in the love triangle, and it's basically each time it happens, it's different. So it's Hollywood in the 1930s, Taos in the 1970s, and the magic system was actually very complex because there was a curse that came about, and there were rules around the curse, and there were rules around the magic. And that was probably one of the most complex things I've done. Math was involved, and it was really bad. I had to figure out exactly, like, wait a minute, so it has to be 34 years. But, there was definitely things that you could and couldn't do. And it was actually a pretty rigid system that I had to, that I remember my editor kind of saying, okay, like, you can't have that happen here or there. So it was keeping me on my toes for 4 different lifetimes.
I remember thinking that when I read your book, like, how is she doing this? Because I can't, in almost all of the magical tournaments and things that happen in my book or in the various books are also timed differently. And I just hope people don't notice that I don't have any idea how many
I had like paper and pencil, and I was like, but no, that doesn't, yeah.
I know what year my book takes place, but I will never tell anybody because I know that people who really know that time period will be like, well, the Gavotte didn't come in until the year after that.
I think we all
accept. That's all they need to know.
Sang, do you want to go, Sangu, or should I go?
No, you go.
Okay. So there are 4 essentially magical systems in the Thistle Grove books because the town is run by 4 magical witch families. There's necromancers, more or less speakers to the dead, elementalists, and a family of green magic healers. And then the Harlows, who are again center stage in this one, are sort of the lower key, allegedly, witches. So their powers are not as flashy and obvious as the other ones, but they do have a stronger and deeper connection to the town for reasons that become more clear without any spoilers in this book, and hopefully the next one. So what I was hoping to do with the magic system in this one was introduce external magic and just talk about a little bit about the fact that these are not the only witches in the world. There are other sources and other types of magic. And part of the reason I wanted to do that was to skew the magic in this book and the atmosphere in this book a little bit closer to horror, which is where I really like to live when I'm writing. I love cozy, I love sort of fun, sparkly witchcraft, but I also really dark the sort of like heavy metal stuff too. And so I was going a little bit in that direction here. So the idea behind introducing this forbidden book of blood spells that Delilah uses was to just open the door a little bit to, give myself leeway to have monsters and creepy spells and just make terrible mistakes and, invoke things that you should never invoke. So that was the idea.
Yeah, and I mean, having read, I want to say 3 of the 4 Thistle Grove books now, I can say that, like, one of the things I love most about it is the fact that with each book, we see this sort of world and the magic expand, and we keep finding out these new secrets. And now, of course, now that you've said that you don't necessarily know what you're doing, maybe you're making it up as you go along, but maybe it works. I mean, I do that all the time. I make things up as I go along. It's just that most of the time I end up writing a standalone, so it works because my editor fixes all the bits that I kind of made up. But yeah, in Irregular Witches, I sort of started from the sort of like from loneliness, because that's what the book is about. Fundamentally, it's about this woman who is very lonely. And so when I was building the magic system, I wanted one that would, and it's not a coincidence that I started writing this during COVID, when I think isolation was a big part of everybody's life. So yes, I wanted a magic system that would contribute to that sense of isolation, to that sense of separation, and how all these witches are yearning for connection. So in spite of the fact that it is a cozy book, I went dark and made it so that all witches are orphans. So it doesn't matter how, but one way or another, a witch will lose their biological parents soon after they're born. And it contributes to this sort of sense that the only community they have is one that they have to seek out, and kind of fundamentally changes the way they are as people, because these are ultimately very isolated people who are just longing for connection and make all kinds of messy mistakes in their quest to find that connection. And I mean, yeah, on a practical level as well, I wanted magic itself to, considering that we have started from a point of they've lost their parents, they're all orphans. I wanted magic itself to be a sort of friendly, warm, almost sentient entity that, I mean, in Mika, the heroine of the book, for her, she reflects at one point that magic has been her one constant companion. And she genuinely thinks of it as a friend, as this visible presence around her that is friendly and loving. And yeah, and I just sort of liked the juxtaposition of those two things.
I love that. So nice. All right. So when it comes to this magic system that you've created and the world that you've created, how much of it comes from basically your own imagination versus research that you've done into witches, etc.? This is partly targeted at Ava so that she can tell us about the research that she's done. But what if it was, if there was research that you did versus it being fully in your imagination, what was that process like? And maybe like, what is something really fun that you learned?
Well, I'll go first again. I definitely, in so many ways, came from research. Like I said, I really tried to base it off of what vulvas truly were known for in their time, particularly the necromancy aspect of it. So it really came out of research, but then I applied a lot of imagination to what that might look like I said, out of context throughout the years with this family kind of carrying it forward, and also how they might use that today, these two main characters kind of discovering these powers, what that might look like for them today or how they might use it today. And I also, added my own flavor on things. So I changed a few things, but there was definitely a lot of research involved, but it wasn't like hard research or really heavy. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So it was really fun research. So yeah, it was a bit of both, but it certainly started with research.
I did a lot of fantastic tarot research, which I wholeheartedly enjoyed. I learned a lot about sort of, and was very unexpected about how they really came into their own in many ways around the Civil War, but in Europe. And then I had a vision of a character who in my mind was like Amy March, and sort of taking her trip to the Europe and bringing back the tarot cards. None of it's in the book. or like a very tiny infinitesimal bit ended up in the actual book. But I know a lot also about the entire Civil War era history of Kansas, which is also not really.
I did quite a bit of research for this book on all sorts of stuff. Basically just everything about Regency living. I did some research on sort of the history of English witchcraft, but I didn't, I more sort of gestured to it than tried to make it any kind of like faithful recreation of that, especially because, I mean, a lot of the records that we have relating to witchcraft seem to, as far as I could tell, seemed to come from people who were accusing their neighbors of being witches. And that's not necessarily, I don't want to take them as authorities on whatever practice people actually had. I did a little bit of research on Caribbean kind of magical practice, which is called Obeah, which was really, really fascinating. Again, that is a real, that's related to real spiritual practices that people still have. So I didn't want to get too close to it. But I have a character who grew up in the Caribbean and does both English magic and this sort of Caribbean magic with African roots. And so I wanted it to feel different from the magic that the English characters did. Yeah.
My editor asked me if I was worried about appropriation of the witchcraft. Did anyone else's editors lean into something? And I was kind of like, well, I don't, tarot cards are for everyone. I couldn't, I was kind of like, well, I've been doing this since I was a teenager. It's all I got. Anyway, it was a weird one. Like I could see it for what you're talking about with Caribbean magic, but I wasn't quite sure how I could be appropriating something I was making up. I don't know. So I don't know if the real witches of Thistle Grove have been contacting you, Lana, or
I use I'm very lucky there in that a lot of the magic there is completely invented. But then when I do gesture to herbs or crystals or things like that, I'll typically go off of things that I've done myself in the past. And most of my knowledge is either sort of Slavic sort of folklore magic, or I was part of a Gardnerian coven for a while. So you learn a lot of the kind of traditional British magic, which, like, if you know anything, the occultists who practice that, most of them just went around and like ripped off other people's traditions and then like cobbled it together. Like that was how Gardnerian Wicca came to be. But it is interesting, and I've always enjoyed that aspect of magic. So in that sense, I don't because I applied it sort of sparingly and only in certain respects, and the families are so different from each other, and all of the spells are completely invented. So I don't think I had to worry as much about it. It's sort of like, well, you know, based on the things that I've seen done in different kind of witchcraft traditions, cooler. Like, what if it was much more interesting and flashier? That's generally where I went with that in Thistle Grove.
Well, Witch in Time is like dark. I mean, it's dark magic. So the mother turns to dark magic to punish the man who corrupted her daughter, essentially. And so when I was doing research, just so much research on dark magic, I mean, my Amazon, you know, kind of inbox like looked like, you know, and all of the books that I was getting from the library and everything, I looked like I looked like a crazy person. I mean, I really did. It was like, you know, demon naming and, you know, and all of this. And, you know, that was, it wasn't a big part of the book, but I felt like I did not have a good handle on that. So I really wanted to spend more time kind of understanding that. But most of the research that A Witch in Time, everything I do has so much research attached to it. And you know, with A Witch in Time, you have 4 time periods. And so each one of those time periods, I mean, the trick there was trying to get the character to evolve in each of the time periods and kind of absorb into the time periods that she is in. But then also you have through points that kind of keep her moving. So you do know that she is the same person throughout. It's just you're seeing her reacting to all of these different time periods. And she kind of ages and grows kind of as you know, as the time period goes on. So, I mean, it was a lot of research. I do like to go on site whenever I can. So in every single one of the cities I was there. And I remember, you know, I hired a Louvre guide for Paris. I remember hiring a man to take me around Los Angeles in the 1930s to show me like what that would have looked like. Not that I didn't know, but like I wanted to actually like be sure that I was like, you know, accurate about everything. And he thanked me for not taking him to Calabasas to see the Kardashians. He said, I never get these kinds of assignments. And so it was really great. It was like, you know, going to like Falcon's Lair and some really interesting old Hollywood, you know, haunts. And that I think is fun. But, you know, you also, and I think anybody who's researching, you know, you like the point you had where like, I did all this research and it didn't make it in the book. I think that's what you have to kind of, you know, sometimes it just gets you prepped for the page, but like, it doesn't have to, like so many things just did not have to be that I had like gone down rabbit holes with on research, did not end up in the book, nor should they have. Otherwise you're like, you know, writing, you know, a historical nonfiction book.
Yeah, none of it belonged. That wasn't me complaining. I could also tell you a lot about the history of the alcohol and prohibition laws between Kansas and Missouri from the Chicken Sisters. That doesn't belong. Like, now I know things.
Like use
right?
one sentence of it, right? But
exactly.
the whole, and it makes the sentence smart, but like,
Exactly.
I feel like I notice that a lot now when I'm reading other people's books that are, set in a historical time period where they'll like mention something really offhand in one sentence. And I'm like, oh, dude, you did a week of research on that. And then you barely got to use it.
But then it also gives you something wonderful to talk about at author events.
Fun and something to do when you're stuck or before you're writing, when you're just pretending to write at that, oh, I can't do this yet. I have to go read this stack of books.
Well, and that's unfortunate. Like when I am a member of the Historical Novel Society, and I do feel like sometimes it's like write the story, get the characters that they have, like they have a conflict, they've got people care about them resolving the conflict. You've got to get that, and then like insert, like now I'll be like insert, historical fact here. Before I would just go, and to your point, like sometimes I think that there is a danger of researching versus writing.
Yeah. Yeah, my whole current draft looks like, insert banter here. There's no researching that, but yeah.
I've had the opposite experience too, where in the course of research, I would come across something that I wasn't necessarily looking for. I was maybe doing research on something else, but then that thing ended up in the novel. Like somehow I was like, oh, I got to use that, or, so that's kind of a fun aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Ava, I also thought that, like, I mean, your setting was just amazing. I mean, that whole, I just imagined this amazing, beautiful kind of, it reminded me like, what was it, Knives Out, that the house, and I always kind of pictured it as that. And I just was fascinated with like what you did with setting. And like, I'm sure, I don't know if you're it's upstate New York, right? I don't even know if you're from there or what, but I was like fascinated with how you brought all that to like, even something as simple as that is like, the research on a setting, like you really nailed that. I got like this creepy house, like it was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of research into Victorian architecture for that house.
All right, so in Witches of Bone Hill, family or particular family members play an important role in how the story unfolds. So going off of that, let's see, how did I word this question? Hold on. So for each of you, I guess, how does family or particular family members, or perhaps in Sangu's case, the absence of family members, play a role in your book, or any of your other books? And can you each talk about like family and the role it plays a little bit?
Well,
Ava,
do you want to go first again?
Ava, you should totally start.
Okay. Obviously, because it's a hereditary witchcraft that my characters are experiencing, family plays a huge role. And I had to make like a whole family tree, and it's sort of like the research. Not everybody in the Bone family gets a mention in the story. It would be way too long, but there are several key players that these two main characters, these sisters, have to kind of piece together after the fact. And of course, there's some haunting and ghostly sightings and plenty of clues, but no real, this is who I am, and this is why I'm showing up. So family plays a huge role because it's hereditary, and because the story of what's been happening to this family over generations is what has caught up to these women who are the last of their family line now. So it was really about bloodlines, and so family was a big deal in this one.
I can go next.
Yeah,
No, you.
we do this
Every time.
every time. Do you want to go first? Because I'm tired.
Oh, sure. So family is always important in the Thistle Grove books because it is about 4 families who have been sort of in the open, but not this whole time, since the context is that the entire town is under this sort of oblivion glamour. And so the witch families live side by side with all of the locals who don't have any magic. And most of the families are fairly tightly knit in different ways. They have different dynamics. And Delilah is a little bit of an outlier here in that she does live in the town. She never made an attempt to leave. She's very closely aligned with sort of the family legacy. It's like her entire personality is getting to inherit the bookstore one day, and that's what she wants. She really loves this role of scholar and witchcraft kind of researcher that the Harlows have, but she's not very close with her actual family members at all. So she's not estranged necessarily from them, but they're not anywhere near as tight as the other families are. And part of the reason is that Delilah is so independent and caustic and what one might call unlikable, if I didn't hate that label so much for female characters, as a character that she pushes people away on purpose due to a lot of insecurities accumulated earlier in her life. And so part of the story is her discovering that a lot of the preconceptions she has about her family are not really true, and that there are bonds there that could be had. There's not even reconciliation so much as just misunderstandings that she's held on to for a very long time that have become true by dint of her believing that of her other family members. And so part of her evolution or her journey in this book is discovering that her family can and will support her in ways that she would never have expected and would not have wanted previously. So it's like a soft vulnerability becoming kind of a different kind of strength as she sort of solves the mystery of the blood spell and what's happening to her and the role that the Harlows play in the town.
Yeah, like you said, absence of family in my book is sort of where it all begins. And I think it's, as much as anything, for me, it was about writing about that sense of, I think anybody who has either been an immigrant or been the child of an immigrant can sort of understand this sense of not feeling like you don't have roots, feeling like if you do, you don't know where they are. And that's a big deal for the witches in this world, because they don't have roots. They don't, I mean, they might know where they came from, they might know where they were born, but they don't really have the sort of legacies that we take for granted. And so for them, it is very much about building a family out of typically just, a hodgepodge group of, my favorite sort of like found family trope of just like the motley crew of weirdos in the ragtag bunch that just happen to, find that they actually love each other a lot. And I think that was what I loved most about writing this, was the fact that in spite of the absence of biological family, the finding of family is such a big part of the story.
I write a lot. I think all 3 of my books have been about mother-daughter relationships. And I had a wonderful relationship with my mother. And I will say that, in the first book, it's the mother trying to protect her daughter and unwittingly propels her on a journey. The second one is kind of about the legacy that that her mother's been hiding from her. Laura's mother's been hiding from her. My mother actually died last year in the middle of my 3rd book, and I really didn't realize. I mean, I began to kind of write. I was already writing about the very first chapter of my 3rd book, the one that's coming out. The mother has a breakdown in the very first chapter upon seeing this actress Gemma Turner. And this little boy leaves this little boy basically orphaned and alone as a result. So he is always haunted by what the connection was between his mother and this actress, and it propels him on to really find out the answer, but to also like get to know his mother in the process, because he's, you know, a little boy and he's left without her. And, you know, to have my own mother kind of in the process of this, you know, I realized that, you know, you're always kind of searching for those people that you lost. And, you know, at the end, it was very much his quest to find his mom again. And so that is, I think that's definitely a theme for all of my books, which is this, you know, idea of this mother-child relationship.
So am I muted? No. Okay, I did it. Good job, Melinda. So sisterhood is a huge theme in Lydia Bennet, which I mean, the Bennet sisters are some of the iconic sisters from literature, and those relationships are, you know, already so well built and so relatable and believable. And I sort of, but Pride and Prejudice, of course, sort of focuses on the older two sisters. And the younger two, Lydia and Kitty, are sort of a pair as well. And Lydia, spoilers for Pride and Prejudice, gets into a lot of trouble, which drives the plot of the latter part of the book. But Kitty is just sort of, she doesn't really have much of a role to play in the plot. She is sort of Lydia's sidekick, her companion. And so when I was starting to figure out this book, one of the first things I thought about was like, well, Lydia and Kitty are very close. What is Kitty's role in this? If Lydia's a witch, is Kitty also a witch? And I was sort of thinking about how in Pride and Prejudice, she's almost like an accessory of Lydia's, and Lydia seems to like take it for granted a little bit. So I kind of expanded from there, and also from the fact that she is named Kitty. So in my version, Kitty is actually a cat who's Lydia's familiar, who she's enchanted to look like a human girl, and kind of like made the world think that there is a fifth Bennet sister. But in fact, she's still a cat. And so their relationship is sort of, probably the central one of the book, and it is very, very close and loving, but also they fight a lot, and Lydia tends to take her for granted. And it's a relationship of sisters, but also of witch and familiar. And one of the sisters sort of like thinking of the other almost as her creation, which I think is something that older siblings tend to think about younger siblings. And I'm very close with my sisters, so I really enjoy writing sister relationships.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt for a second to say that making Kitty Bennet a cat is just like the most brilliant thing.
Yeah, I am so here for that.
Thank you.
Right?
100%.
When I thought of that, that's when I knew I was going to write the book.
Yeah, like that's a take my money moment.
Yeah.
So when I compare playing the witch card to a grown-up Gilmore Girls, it is really because it really is very much about mothers and daughters. My protagonist, Flair, was the daughter of a mother who had her at 17 and who was not the success story that Lorelai Gilmore was. And as a result, her relationship to magic and her own heritage is both interrupted and also very, very bad. And she's come home actually to the house of her grandmother who is dead, and she really wants the life she believes her grandmother would have given her. And she, well, first of all, these are just, and then she has her teenage daughter there as well, and we have Flair and her mother Sin and her daughter Lucy, and they are all three people who actually sincerely want each other to be happy, but they don't understand that the thing they want for the other person is not what will make them happy. And they really make the mistake of trying to use magic to give the other person what they think that person wants or should want. And not surprisingly, it doesn't go well. So, and I think that's very, that's just, so I have teenage daughters myself. I have a great relationship with my mom. there is no hereditary magic, or if there is, I've not been old enough to be told about it yet. It's a crushing blow to me. But anyway, I think now that is a real thing, this like feeling that you would, trust me, you would be so happy if you would just do what I want you to do. And it's not the way it works.
All right.
We're all so polite.
We've got some time for a couple audience questions. So at this point, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A feature, and I will ask as many as we have time for. To start us off, we've got a question from Joe. What is your writerly advice for someone who wants to write witchy/magical fiction to help get them started?
Well, what Constance said, story first, magic world second. But then I think, and I'd be interested to hear if everybody agrees, but when I first drafted this, I didn't go hard enough into the magic. Like I was trying to sort of half-ass it, like, well, it's kind of magic. Maybe it's magic. No one knows. I don't doubt that's a problem Lana had. But I'd be interested to hear if anyone else had that sort of like, I don't know if I'm allowed to actually, make candles light and things like that. I really struggled with it.
Well, I got complaints that A Witch in Time wasn't witchy enough. I mean, even though, and so I went out of my way to make Ladies of the Secret Circus witchier. So I put a lot more, and I was like, okay, spells and magic. People wanted spells and magic. And, so I did a lot more of that for the second book. So, I definitely, I think though, paying attention to what's coming out, I think you have to know kind of what the market is. I always love to see like fresh takes, like it just listening to, everyone on the panel here, there's a fresh take to everything. And so, it's like there's a lot of which, it's like, oh, a witch doing this or which, I mean, you can really kind of make some fresh approaches to, whatever book that you are looking at doing. And so it's just kind of, I love the idea of like the, witches with the Bennett sisters. I mean, that's a really fresh take on,
I think it's also good to know what you want to be doing. Do you want to be doing contemporary genre with a touch of magic, or do you want to be writing fantasy with a romantic component? I like reversed myself entirely almost as I've been writing these books. I initially held back on the magic because I was thinking I wasn't allowed to do that for rom-coms. And then the further I got into it, the more I realized what I really want to be writing is fantasy with romantic elements. And so that's what these books are now. They, I think, functionally are still referred to as rom-coms, but that's not in reality what they are. And people constantly ask me that in panels, like, isn't this actually fantasy? I'm like, yeah, it is. Because I changed my mind about what I wanted to be doing. And I think it's interesting and worth the moment to think about, are you very interested in the world building, or are you more interested in you always have to have relationships, you always have to have deep character arcs and all of that, but do you really want like a higher fantasy sort of setting? What is it that really intrigues you? How much research do you want to do? I think being clear on it from the start is probably important as well.
Yeah, I would say, in my first draft of The Witches of Bone Hill, I was trying to hold off on the reveal that they were witches till a lot farther into the novel. And my editor was like, no. We want that. We want to know that right away. And we want to really get into that a lot sooner. And so that really kind of gave me the freedom to just open the floodgates and get into, all of the accessories and all the things that come along with that. And then really advance that through it. And the thing I would say to advise somebody, and this is just, coming from me or my own perspective, is practice magic. Try something, it's obviously it's going to be different than like what we're talking about in a novel, but it's still, I think there's something to be gained from like getting your feet wet a little bit.
I would just add that I think every one of us has said this in one way or another when we were talking about our books. When you're making up a magic system, make sure it reflects the inner life of your protagonist and the stakes for them. Because you're making up a magic system, you could just make it easy for them to get out of any problem. But you have to construct a system that mirrors the emotional journey that real people go on, because that's what'll make the book compelling.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of echo what other people have said, read as much as you can in the genre, the subgenre, because you need to know what's out there. You need to know what's coming next. You need to know what people are writing, because as much as I definitely advocate for, the whole eyes on your own paper thing, write the story that you want to write. You do still need to know what else is happening out there. And if nothing else, because on a fundamental level, you can't really get a foot in any door without being able to compare your book to at least two others in the sphere you're writing in. And so you need to know what's out there, and you need to actually know what's out there, not make the mistake that somebody told me someone else made recently, in which they said that they compared a book to their book, and it was the completely the opposite genre. It was like horror versus romance, that kind of sort of polarized thing. So so know what you're writing and know what else is out there.
Also, I think, the concept of the witch is it's so fraught in history. I did a panel at the Historical Novel Society with just two fabulous writers, and there was a Guardian article about why the witch has suddenly everyone is kind of, writing about it. And it's really reclaiming power. And I think so, also when you are developing your, what are you trying to, is there, in the first book, there was a character that, had little hope. And, what she really had was she, had this legacy behind her of being a witch. And so there was this, it was a great way to kind of empower her. And so it was empowering somebody who did not have power. And so, I think that's also a real opportunity, that if you've got, to kind of look at why why you want to write about witches to begin with. I mean, yes, it's magic and it's cool and it's got, but also there's a very deeper meaning between I think it really is a form of empowerment anymore for people who may not have voices. So.
That's such an interesting way of thinking about it. So I'm going to take one more audience question, and then we're going to play a little game quickly at the end. Let's see. What interested all of you in writing books about witches? And were you interested in witches before you knew that you wanted to write about it, or did it kind of come in conjunction with writing the book? How did that come about?
I feel like what Constance just said just made me realize why I was interested in writing about witches. I think it is a lot about power and changing the narrative and sort of giving power to characters who might not have had it otherwise. I used to work in TV, and I wrote for this sort of feminist comedy late night show for 4 years, which was great. It was a dream job for me, but I was writing about terrible things happening to women every week. And it really ground me down. And when I left, I really wanted to do something the opposite of that. I wanted to do something joyful and fun and about a woman who escapes the trap that she's in. And that's really, that's how I ended up writing a witch book.
I'll go next just because I have the opposite problem, which is I can't seem to write a book that's not about witches. It doesn't matter what I think it's going to be before I start. Every single one of my books witches in it. But I've loved witch books, and generally I think there's an interesting also overlap with witches in any kind of marginalized group. And there's a lot of interesting books coming out now, like Juno Dawson's Shadow Cabinet books are great in terms of looking at the overlaps there. But I think for me, it was the fact that just like Constance was saying, there's something about witches reclaiming power, and also there's like an inherent kind of like stick it to the patriarchy when it comes to witches. And for me, it was interesting when I was first writing, I have made almost all of my characters have been bisexual in the past, and I was writing a book and it was about a bisexual witch, and an editor was like, that's a really like a cheesy trope, and I was like, it is like it's been done a lot, really, because where are these books? Did I just not see them? Like I've somehow missed the books that I wish I'd been reading my whole life. So yeah, that was partly why I was doing it, because I think it's an interesting way to play with sexuality and identity, and just the metaphors that you can get out of it, and also the literal traditions of witchcraft and what they entail are usually really fascinating in terms of psychology and talking about what happens to women and the kind of power that women have. So yeah.
For me, it was actually very different. I didn't write this during the pandemic, but I think I started thinking about it very hard then. And what I wanted to write about was the idea that even if you have all the power that magic could give you, there are some things you can't fix and don't actually even want to. So I was really thinking about mothers and children, and how, as much as maybe you want your kid to do what you want them to do, if you could make them, then you've just defeated like the whole purpose of everything. So I kind of wanted to write about how even if we could be magical, it wouldn't fix our problems.
That's a great take.
It's a little depressing compared to power, though.
And power is dangerous too. I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. I can say I've definitely been kind of obsessed with the archetype of the witch since I was a little girl. And, at my age, grew up, in my bio, I say I fell in love with all the wrong characters and all the wrong stories. I definitely was gravitating towards the antagonists. Most of the witches I grew up reading and seeing were the antagonists, but they displayed such a broader range of emotion, and they had agency and leadership and ambition, things that we weren't really allowed to see in women very much, or when we did, those women were demonized. So, and that still happens a lot, but it even as a kid, that just stayed with me. I was consistently gravitating towards those characters and more interested in them than I was the protagonists most of the time. And so I wanted to write about those women. So
I feel like my witch sort of like imprinting happened really early, and it was, and this is just going to sound so ridiculous, but I mean, it was Hansel and Gretel. I'm not advocating for the cooking of small children, but I am saying that if I had a house that I have lovingly built and a child comes along and starts eating my house. I mean, and yes, I know that, the house is a trap and all that, but still, I have a lot of sympathy for the witch.
Just dessert pun in there. If you ever wanted to do the rom-com of Hansel and Gretel.
Can you imagine? Oh.
I had this book that I got an agent and we pitched it, and it didn't really go anywhere, and I didn't know that happens a lot, and it got pulled back, and I was devastated for many years, and then I sent out A Witch in Time that got picked up, and I took the plot of the first book, added a witch to it. That became my second book, and that actually and it like took off the page. So it just took off. I do think that I went back to what I loved to read. I loved to read Anne Rice. I put it in the chat. I love, the CW. I mean, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, I like, here I am like an old woman watching Sabrina, and, I think it just, I was writing what I thought people wanted me to write, and not really what I really enjoyed it. And finally, when I just like let loose and started writing about another dimension, like you can have everyday problems, but like if you're Samantha Stevens, they're like a lot more interesting because you've got a whole other dimension to kind of deal with. And so it just opened up possibility for me, and I love that about anything that is in kind of the fantasy kind of genre. It just allows just to kind of open up the area of exploration. And for me, that actually, my first book that didn't sell shouldn't have sold. It was terrible. So and I think that this kind of writing really was the path I needed to take.
All right. We are technically over time, but I do still want to play our fun little game of character superlatives. So sorry to my colleague, but we're going to play it real quick anyway. That's what happens when you leave me in charge. So the way this works for anyone at home is I am going to give a superlative, most likely to blah, 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 and the authors will answer either with one of their own characters or another author's character if they happen to have read one of the other author's books. So first one is most likely to accidentally hex themselves.
Well, of mine, I would be Eustace, because she'd probably be stoned and make kind of horrible mistake.
Well, that would have to be one of Lana's characters from the necromancy family.
Yeah,
I don't remember their names,
yeah.
but
them.
yeah,
It's probably Issa. It's Issa. Yeah, Issa.
yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah,
it's got to be.
She probably. I'm like, did that happen?
I was too. I was like, wait.
I kind of feel like Flair in playing the witch card, because I mean, doesn't she kind of does that? Doesn't she accidentally?
She accidentally curses her ex-husband. Yeah. Who wholeheartedly deserves it. But
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question that was deserved, but yeah, it wasn't intentional.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, next one is most likely to, and this is inspired by Charmed, the TV show, most likely to find a grimoire in a relative's attic.
Oh, well, Juliet does.
Delilah.
Juliet finds that in Witch in Time. So
yeah. My character is in the basement, and also Delilah agreed.
Delilah literally does do that in the end.
Okay, and last one, most likely to try out a love spell on themselves or someone else.
Lydia literally does that in my book, and it does not go well.
We really didn't need to stretch very far for these.
Yeah, Flair's mom, Sin, misuses the lover's card over and over again to poor effect.
I would say Esme does that in Ladies of the Secret Circus.
All right, well, we have definitely gone over time now, but I would just want to say a huge thank you again to all of our lovely authors for joining us tonight. And thank you to all of our attendees for being such a great audience. I am so excited for all of these books. I love a witchy book, so make sure to check out all of our authors' books. My colleague has dropped a link in the chat and can probably drop it again if you would like to buy any of them. And again, we do have book plates and some other little goodies if you order Witches of Bone Hill through us. Also, make sure to check out our events page, because we do lots of events. Most of them are if not fully virtual, then also streamed for a virtual audience. So even if you're not local to Washington, D.C., we've got tons of events that you can join in on. And we're always very excited about them. So thank you again to everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Congrats,
you.
Emma. Congrats.
Thanks.